Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to your current affairs program, IBlogger, on GBC24, your all-news channel. My name is Fanny Nana Asamoah. CGIAR is a global partnership for improving food security, nutrition, and economic growth for the world's most vulnerable poor. It is made up of national and regional research institutes, civil society organizations, academia, and the private sector. Their programs on dryland and cereals and grain legumes are two major global research programs that the Alliance has embarked on to improve the productivity of farmers and the consumption of cereals and legumes in sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. So far, the research programs, along with national and international public and private partners, have developed and released over 119 drylands and cereal varieties and 256 new legumes varieties since 2012. The cereals and grain legumes programs also focus on latest and Central Africa towards the improvement of crops including millet, sorghum, cowpea, and beans. On our program this afternoon, we shall be looking at the input of this research group in developing Ghana's agri sector and what the Alliance is all about. With me to do the discussion is Dr. Shoba Sivasankar, Director of Dryland Cereals and Grain Legumes. Doc, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Briefly explain to us what this global research program is all about, what you focus on.
The CGIAR Research Program on Dryland Cereals and the one on grain legumes are focused on crops that are mostly growing in the dryland regions of the world and trying to research on them to produce goals towards the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. So that would include improved food security in the regions that they are grown, increased income from selling surplus grain, improved nutrition, especially with these crops because of the improved nutritional value of the crops. These are also important for climate change adaptation, especially the dryland crops, both the cereals and the legumes, because they are capable of adjusting and adapting to conditions that are very dry, where other crops have difficulty growing, and that is why they're grown in regions which are where drought is prevalent.
How is this connected to the SDG?
The SDGs, so our, this is the agricultural research part of the Food and Agricultural Organization and the United Nations, and so our goals are aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals.
So you do research for FAO, and FAO is working towards the SDGs?
Yeah, FAO is the sponsor for us.
Let's talk about the progress of agricultural research on the dryland cereals and legumes in Africa, and especially West Africa and Ghana.
In West Africa in general, the focus has been on sorghum, pearl millet, cowpea, and groundnut. And we also have some level of research on finger millet. So the primary research is to improve the productivity of the crops themselves.
What has been your research findings in Ghana so far, if you've started?
So it's all releasing varieties that produce more yield. So how the program works is that they collaborate with the national research institutes and provide the basic germplasm or the varieties, and then improve it in collaboration with the national research organizations and bring it to the farmers as seeds.
So in Ghana, which institution are you directly working with?
In Ghana, our primary relationship for dryland cereals has been capacity development in alliance, an intended alliance with WACI through the University of Ghana. It is it's capacity development for improving breeding capabilities, expertise in the young generation, and that was the intention. So the program actually started mid-2012, and we are moving into a phase 2. So the structure of the program gradually evolves with that as well. So with Ghana, the Dryland Cereals program has had a Dryland Scholarship program, and that program, with although the intention was to have heavy budget. We had, we had to suffer some of the budget shortages, but basically our intention was to improve the capacity development for breeding.
Okay.
Breeding research.
These staple crops you've just mentioned, the cowpea, the legume, and the sorghum that you found in Ghana, how do they contribute to the resolution of global challenges and the SDGs?
Okay. So these crops and the target countries that we have. So the programs, between the two programs, there are 37 target countries. And so those target countries have been selected because those crops are very, very critical in those target countries for the staple food and also for the smallholder farmers' subsistence agriculture. So by focusing on improving their production, it has been able to produce more grain through crop improvement research and improve nutrition components of that grain, so that the subsistence agricultural farmers are able to have food security, nutrition security, and income, where we can actually relate this to a commercial value chain. So that's been the challenge that we've had for the most part, because dryland agriculture is mostly subsistence when it comes to some of these crops.
Why is it so?
Because they're grown in areas where the climates are extremely harsh, and so other crops are not capable of growing and producing a yield. They grow under conditions with very low water, right? And then they grow in extremely poor soils with very low inputs. Like, most of these cultivated conditions do not apply fertilizers, and they are actually depending upon whatever comes out of a planted crop. So we try to help them with practices that can actually save and be efficient in terms of the input that goes into production. So one of the input is the seed itself. So we try to research improving the seed so that the crop that the seed produces would have improved yield, improved resistance to the major pests and diseases, the insect pests and diseases, they would be resistant to that. But at the same time, we also improve the practices, help to improve practices. For example, contour bunding, that would help to conserve water, moisture. And then we do micro dosing of fertilizers. So micro dosing of fertilizers is, in developing countries, you can actually dump fertilizers, or there's an optimal fertilizer regime which goes into the kilogram scale. Whereas in this case, you're using tiny amounts of the optimal concentrations of the nutrients that the plant requires, and then place it very close to the root zone, very close to the seed as it grows. So the seed just gets that as soon as it grows, and it's very close to the root zone, and it's not broadcast, so it is placed where it is required. And so the plant benefits out of it, and the farmer can put more into the field with less amount of his money, or her money.
Okay. Let's come to the issue of sorghum and millet. Why them? Why this particular plant? Any reason why?
Yes. So sorghum and millets are the staple food in most of the west of Africa. And it used to be the staple food quite a bit in India as well, to the communities who are doing subsistence farming. Now they're changing a little bit to rice and other crops. But in West Africa, if you look at the three crops, well, there are 4 crops that focus in West Africa, including groundnut. But cowpea is the one that has the most area in West Africa. And similarly, sorghum and millets and pearl millet, their area is most in West Africa. And that area in all 3 crops is actually increasing over time. And so that means that there is a demand from the food sector for the people, for food security, and for other reasons on these crops. So the research that is going on in these crops, in these regions, are primarily through the CGIAR and our programs. So our programs, like I said at the beginning, collaborate with the national research institutes, agricultural research institutes, and work towards the national goals in order to produce what is required out of these crops.
This National Research Institute you are talking about, is it in Ghana or is it in India?
In each nation, there are agricultural research institutes.
Okay.
And we work with the National Agricultural Research Institutes in each country.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in Ghana, the research institute is in University of Ghana?
In Ghana, we have not had a major presence through the research itself, but it's through the capacity building.
Okay.
And we have had advice from the Ghana University.
Okay, because we have the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research.
Yes, yeah. WACI is the primary collaboration that we have had, WACCI, and its director has been on our advisory committee as well. So,
okay.
So like I said, when I say this is a global collaboration, we bring in people from across the globe to advise, to understand the needs globally as well as on a regional and local basis, and then implement our planning and research programs.
Oh, okay. Because I think we also have the Food Research Institute here.
We do not have we do not have an association with them.
With them,
but
okay.
yeah. But those are the kind of the downstream value chain development that we have started focusing on. Some parts of the program, some regions, some countries in the program.
Apart from sorghum and legume being staple foods of most of the West African countries, let's talk about their nutritional benefits. Were they considered also? Their nutritional benefits.
Yes.
Was it one of the reasons why you chose this crop?
Yeah. So the pearl millet. Let's take pearl millet.
Okay.
So that's one of the millets that has extremely high natural capability of accumulating iron and zinc, right? And these nutrients are present in quantities in these crops at levels way above that's present in normal cereals. For example, rice, if you take rice or maize or wheat, the content of zinc and iron that naturally accumulates in a pearl millet is significantly higher. So that is one way. If it is a staple food, the natural way of improving the nutritional content of the diet. The second millet is the finger millet. Now, finger millet is a crop that is grown in several parts of East Africa and also to some extent in West Africa as well. And that one accumulates compound nutrients like calcium, and it is used for the bone health of sick patients. And so the amount of calcium that accumulates in finger millet is tenfold as much that happens in wheat or in rice.
Okay. Now let's switch to last year, the Year of the Pulses, International Year of the Pulses, last year 2016.
Yes.
What's it about?
Oh yeah, so the International Year of Pulses was 2016. It was a declaration by the Food and Agricultural Organization.
Okay.
And it brought together several players in the legume arena, researchers, market value chain actors, and capacity development, all of that together. So they had these as 4 main themes, and it was being implemented primarily with the help of an organization called Emerging Ag that worked together with the Global Pulse Confederation, GPC. As part of that, the research aspect that I can talk about very clearly is a 10-year pulse research strategy.
Okay.
And that was a vision for 10 years, for the next 10 years, where several of the legume crops would be benefiting from different areas of research. So see, some of the major crops like rice or maize and wheat, they have some of these technologies at the high end of the spectrum.
Okay.
Whereas these crops are, at one point they used to be called the poor man's crops. They have been called orphan crops because nobody actually researches on them.
Okay.
Yet there is a major
Why was it so?
Because a lot of the funding goes into maize, rice, and wheat.
Okay.
So these crops get very little funding. Yet there is a big population, especially in low-income food deficit countries, in India, in Latin America, in Africa, where they are primarily grown. There's a population that is dependent on these crops for food, and just because of that, they've been very behind in terms of technologies that came along. Just for example, you look at the yield from 1 hectare of the crop, it would be several-fold less. If sorghum was to be grown in West Africa, the yield comes to be just about 1 ton, mostly below 1 ton per acre. Now, if you look at the same crop growing in Australia or in the US, the crop can yield up to 4 or above. 4 tons. So you see the difference in what research can bring into these crops, and thus help with the sustainable development goals of food security and nutrition security. So I've walked through fields in West Africa, in Niamey, Niger, in Mali. These crops are allocated the poorest of soils because all of the best areas go to the major crops, and also with high input, and these get the lowest input. And no wonder the yields would be much, much lesser. So there has to be someone who focuses on the research to produce the agricultural practices that produce better yield out of these crops, and also the crop varieties themselves. You have to have good varieties. And maize, the trajectory of maize just in North America has been significant just because of that research that went into that.
This is IBlogger on GBC24. We have been discussing using research to develop Ghana's agri sector. We take a break here. We'll be right back.
When night falls and the city lights are shown bright, with the country entirely asleep, then the work of the journalist begins. Our imagination goes wild, dreaming, thinking, and searching for that unique story idea. Visualizing and translating these ideas into action brings the story to life. And, like the fizz in our wine glasses, the story bubbles, finding space as headlines on front pages in the print, broadcast electronically, and posted on new media across the globe. And when it catches the attention of the powers that be, they act speedily. Panelists and I as we speak to weightier issues from all quarters of the professional ladder, share our journalistic experiences, and offer insight beyond what is reported, all on one magazine platform, the Reporters Roundtable, every Thursday at this time on GBC24. The Reporters Roundtable, all angles, all sides.
Welcome back. We have been discussing using research to develop Ghana's agri sector on IBlogger on GBC24, your all-news channel. Doc, we go to agribusiness and the value chain for these crops. How could they be developed, and what could be their prospect, legumes and sorghums?
Value chain development is the major way that a market pull can actually be created, so that the Sustainable Development Goal 1, which is reduce poverty, can be actually met. So with the programs, we have a component that is output markets and a post-harvest value. So for sorghum and millets, there is an example is the Sorghum Value Chain Development Center that's in Nairobi, Kenya, where we work together to bring producers and consumers together, so that there can be an established pipeline of raw material. Another example is again going to East Africa. I'm going from west to the east now because of the importance of sorghum that has been happening all along for the beer industry. And when you know, the beer industry took off, East African breweries, Nile breweries, all those companies were actually sourcing from the farmers. So there would be small organizations that would bring farmer cooperatives together to collect the produce and then supply to the breweries. And these small organizations would also help to cover some of the insurance, some of the early needs for inputs for the farmers so they can get a good crop. So this is, you know, these are very sporadic examples. If this happened on a wider scale, we could have the research contributing to the value chain, and the value chain then pulling the producers from subsistence to market-oriented agriculture. And that's not happening to the level that you know, one would anticipate, or one would really, and for that to happen, I think what needs to happen is that there need to be a coordinating mechanism of all of the players. There are so many NGOs, so many players in the field, on the research, on the downstream, and you know, they're all in disparate units. So without a coordination of what goes on in each nation, so a national program or a national plan that brings together these expertise should be developed at the nation with all of the players in place.
Is it a problem bringing all these institutions and organizations together to collaborate on your research? Have you attempted it?
Yeah, we have, and the CGIAR has been one of the places that this can happen, especially in the regions that we are working in. You know, the CGIAR has centers in East Africa and West Africa, and you know, most of the LIFDC countries. So, they have been the major players, the major network connectors for anybody. So, for example, the program that I lead are based in India, at a center, at a CGIAR center, which is called International Crop Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics, which is basically the dry regions. And that organization has regional offices in West Africa and East Africa, and the staff in the location are well connected with all of the players. Now, with this connection, we can have little bits and pieces of work, but a thorough planning, a thorough strategy at the national level, and then bringing all the players in along with that plan. The plans usually fall apart because of the funding, right? So, and there is no stability in either the plan or the funding, and because of that, you know, you cannot see it through the completion. Wherever a nation has committed to, in Africa especially, the 10% commitment to agricultural development, wherever that is committed, it has seen that progress where actors have come together. FARA is one example of bringing together these value chain actors and innovation platforms, the Forum for Agricultural Research in Africa. So African organizations, the CADEP, FARA, all of those have also been key partners of the CGIAR in order to make this happen. So like I said, the CGIAR is the agricultural part of research part of it, which collaborates with networks on the ground. And in Africa, there are really strong networks that we've been able to collaborate with. But somehow, you know, a long-range vision and a long sustained implementation has not been the case in a lot of instances. So if you can have like 5 to 10 years of committed development, then a lot of these things would be changing. And again, bringing innovation platforms, research, and consumers together in a value chain approach would be.
You were saying this is the third year of this program.
We are now at 4.5 years.
1.5.
4.5.
How long is it? Is it the project?
It will be going into a second phase, and there is a discussion on how the program will be structured.
So we didn't know that now.
No, we do not know how the structure.
Talking a bit about your challenges, collaboration and all that. Funding, you mentioned funding. Let's talk about funding. How easy or difficult is it to find funding for a project like the CGIAR?
The CGIAR is actually funded by what we call the CGIAR fund.
Okay.
That comes from various governments directly. So there are about more than 20 countries that put money into the CGIAR fund directly. And then we also have foundations giving us money, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Oh, okay.
And then there is the USAID, Agency for International Development of the United States. They are all our major funders. Now, the current programs that we have, Dryland Cereals, Grain Legumes, they are 2 out of 15 programs that is part of a reform process for the CGIAR. So the CGIAR has been focusing on research for the last 40 plus years. But most recently, since 2007, 2008, there has been an attempt to reform the research, due to all of the challenges that I mentioned. And this is part of the reform process. So with this reform process, there are still challenges because, changing a 40 plus year culture is a little tricky. So that's challenging. But at the same time, these various donors also have critical areas of research that they would support. For example, our major donors are primarily supporting our research on crop improvement.
Okay.
And then we collaborate with other agencies to have FARA has been a partner with which we can do the value chain development approach. Now, one thing that I would also say is that these programs, all of the CGIAR programs, like I said, the 15 CGIAR programs, the development of gender perspectives have been very, very front and center.
Okay.
And again, to come back to our crops, sorghum and millets in West Africa, when I first joined the program, I was told that they are called women's crops. Women's crops.
Why?
And again, this is because women are the people who actually cultivate them, grow them.
And they work on them, dry them and all that.
They work on them, they do all of the work on them, especially because the remuneration is primarily towards the food security of the family. Now, when it comes to a market-oriented culture, then everybody comes in. So there's a benefit out of that. So we've been trying to understand the women's perspectives from why they're in the predicament, but more importantly, how we can help them. What are the kind of traits that they would prefer? For example, they would look at cooking quality. Easier cooking varieties would be something that they would like because the fuel part of it is also an aspect that they would like to have research on. But with this being staple for some of the subsistence agricultural areas, this would be the primary area through which nutrients come in. So for improving their nutrient content, decortication of sorghum would improve cooking, but then some of the nutrients might be lost during decortication. And then mechanization. Can we actually mechanize and reduce the drudgery for women farmers, and also give them back some of the time that goes into farming so that they can do other things? We, in our program, during the short period that we've been functioning, we've also thought of women entrepreneurship so that they can actually be business entrepreneurs on their own right. So how we can help them and support them for those kind of things, and that could probably be in the second phase when we go into.
When is the second phase starting?
The second phase would likely start early in 2018.
2018.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about African scientists and agriculturalists.
Mm-hmm.
How is your program building their capacity?
Building the capacity, and so capacity building has been a major mandate for the CGIAR in its global perspective. I'm just one part of that, right? But every program has a capacity building component. For a crop improvement program like ours, which is primarily focused on commodity crops, capacity development comes from the fact that the National Agricultural Research Organizations and the National Agricultural Universities are closely allied with these programs and with these centers, the CGIAR centers. So directly there is a collaborative implementation of the research in mainly breeding, in agronomy, these are all sciences in agriculture, entomology, which is the insect science, and pathology, which is the disease science. So these are all in a collaborative manner. But when the CG was established by earlier times, the first person, Norman Borlaug, was instrumental in CIMMYT coming into place in Mexico, and then these other centers have come further there. But the way that it operates is that the germplasm collections are developed by the CG researchers, but it's the national researchers who actually bring it out to the public in their own nations. Now, capacity building as an effort in itself, the Dryland Cereals program had started in its first phase what we call the Dryland Cereals Scholarship Program. So we had set apart a certain amount of budget that would support students to get their master's degrees or to do their PhDs with their universities and in collaboration with a developing nation university as much as possible on these crops. Again, budget has been a major issue, and great intentions, and I would really like to see the Dryland Cereals Scholarship Program going into the second phase with greater strength and with greater funding, because there is a crop of researchers that are aging, and they're going to be going out of the picture very soon. And so the younger generation need to be trained in the best, most advanced technology. And technology is advancing, like we were talking just earlier. There's advanced technology, molecular tools that can be used in breeding, and digital agriculture, digital tools that we can actually use in collecting and integrating and interpreting all of this data that comes together. All of these needs to be part and parcel of the training of the second generation of agricultural scientists across the globe, and specifically in places where we are focusing on in Africa, India, South Asia, in the Latin American LIFTC countries.
Okay, these scholarships you're talking about, do we have some in Ghana currently?
Yes, but we started off with the high ambition, but we had to cut back, but we do have.
Because of funding?
Because of funding.
So you don't have that anymore?
We do. It is, there are students who are coming through the program. We have been able to support their PhD programs partially, and those students are coming through partially.
What does it mean?
Partially meaning that because we could not support a full program, so we wanted to spread the money across programs wherever students were needing that. So we could either meet the tuition or we could meet their research funding. So that's how we have been structuring. But originally, when we started it, we had thought that we would have the funding for, separate students for the complete programs. We did that in Grain Legumes, but it ended up, we had a pretty heavy funding there, 1.5 million, and the number of students is very low with that amount of funding. So the funding has to be strong, and all of these 5 students are doing their PhD from Africa, but in the US.
Okay, so the 5 students are from Africa. Do you have any from Ghana?
No.
No. I would like to see more Ghanaians the next time.
I would too, yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about innovations in agri sciences. The prospects for Africa, is it bright?
It is bright.
Tell me about it.
Okay. So first of all, the advanced technologies, when it's brought into the current manner of crop improvement research, it can significantly improve yields. But that alone is not sufficient. We have to bring in the right agronomic practices and diversity of cropping systems, multiple crops growing together and also benefiting from the crop livestock systems together. So that would be good. So the innovations on the research front We have the BECA, it's a biological, I cannot immediately get the full form, but it's a molecular facility that is based out of ILRI, International Livestock Research Institute in East Africa, in Nairobi. And that is a hub for all of the molecular research to a great extent in the region. A similar hub in West Africa would be very useful. To some extent, in Senegal, there is some amount of research, but to have a molecular hub is critical, because that would allow the recent innovative trends in genomics, which is the front-end science for both plant science and animal science. You know the DNA, you know the genes, you know which ones you can actually look at in order to get your best crop for stress resistance or for yield or anything. So to be using that technology, in addition to knowing, the people knowing and having that capacity to use that, there also has to be infrastructure. So those innovations, and also the good thing in a way is that we can learn from crops like maize, which are at the very front and which also have the interest of the private sector. Our crops do not have the interest of the private sector, especially in these regions, in the regions that we the countries that we have as our focus countries. So with the infrastructure for doing the high end of research, it is possible to do many changes. The other part of the picture, again, like we talked, the value chains, to establish the value chains and connect the business aspects. And there is so much that is going on that just needs an integration in order to connect the ultimate buyer directly with the producer, and then have that full value chain in place and the training in place for the people who are involved.
Okay, speaking of innovations and genes, you just mentioned genes.
Yeah.
Genetically modified foods, do they have a place in your research?
Right now, it is just experimental to a very limited scale. But how genes can help is that if you know the entire genome structure or parts of the genome that is related to a trait, you can actually select that particular variety. For example, if you have 1,000 sorghum lines and you know that this particular gene in a few varieties is making the 5 or so varieties or lines more resistant to drought or more resistant to low nutrition in the soil. Phosphorus is a limiting nutrient for plants to grow, right? So if you know, if you have the knowledge of the DNA and if you know the genes that are involved, you can actually identify through technology, PCR, and genomics technologies. A lot of markers, molecular markers exist. With the knowledge of those molecular markers, you can actually pinpoint that, okay, hey, these are the lines that would be performing best under these situations, so we can key in on that. So modification per se does not happen. This is just natural diversity. It is out in the population that we are growing. We just need to screen and identify, okay, this is the ones that are performing better. And you don't have to grow it out. You can actually do it from the seed using the DNA and finding that, okay, you can screen a lot. So it's basically high throughput screening. Okay. So that
finally, before we go, let's come back home to Ghana. Are there areas that you've identified for your research?
Ghana is one of the target countries that we have been focusing for cowpea primarily, and beans to some extent.
Which communities, which areas, which region?
It has been identified as the national focus for us, and it would be the national research institutes that would actually interact
identify these areas
with the regions.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. This is where we draw the curtain on IBlogger on GBC24. We have been talking about a CGIAR and Ghana's agri sector, how it can be developed. Thanks for watching. My name is Fanny Nana Asamoah. Enjoy the rest of our programs.